Passant, Seilagi, Zoyaha, Yuchiha, Muskogee. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Wildcat. I'm a Yuchi member, a Zoyaha member, Child of the Sun member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma, otherwise known as the Creek Nation. And I just can't tell you how really grateful I am to have this kind of turnout for the discussion that we're going to have today. I think I would like to start, before I do anything else, a land acknowledgement. There's a lot of people talking about doing land acknowledgements today, institutions invoking, developing land acknowledgements. What I would like to say is that, you know, the way I've been taught to think about that acknowledgement is literally a thankfulness for the earth we stand on, for the water, for the air, for the wind that makes up who we are as humankind. And as I'm sitting here less than a half a mile as the crow flies south bank of the Kansas River as it meanders across the north side of Lawrence, Kansas, I'm thinking about that water. I'm thinking to the south, the Wakarusa water, both that river and that lake created by the damming of the Wakarusa River, Clinton Lake, are sources of water for Lawrence, Kansas, as are the alluvial soils of the Kansas along the Kansas River. So I give thanks to that earth, to the water, and to the air that's a part of that earth too. And that's a part of each of us. So a land acknowledgement is an acknowledgement about life. It's about an acknowledgement of the first caretakers of this place. Very appropriately, we should honor certainly the Kaw Nation, the Kansa people of this place, the original caretakers who, as many of you know, by government policy, ironically, were removed to Oklahoma, where they reside today. The Kaw people, the people who gave this land its name, live in Oklahoma now because of government policies. So I'm thankful for what the Kaw left us. I'm thankful for the Osage that traveled through these areas and traded and at different points collected medicines and camped here. So I want to acknowledge the power of this place and the first peoples who took care of this place. And so with that, I will say, as my Southern relatives say, aho, done, amen. So we could go on and on for a long time about this topic today. We're not going to. I'm not going to. I'm going to try to hit some high points. And I think what we're talking about today is such that as I talk, what I think would be useful, and I promise I'm going to give myself like 30 minutes, no more than 30 minutes. And of a formal presentation. And as I talk, if you have questions that come up, please put those in the chat box. And then when I'm done, I think Barbara and Sammy are going to kind of monitor the chat box. And so, as Dr. Gilbert and Sammy look at those and pull those out, they can share those. We'll have some questions to get started as soon as I'm done. So, first things first, so I was really humbled when they asked me to speak on this topic about the way that climate change is affecting people emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. And I could immediately relate to it. So I'll tell you my first story today, and it's about writing this book, which those of you that have a copy of it know it's about 150 pages long. It's not a long book, but it's the most difficult thing I ever wrote. And it was difficult because I started it in about, I had the idea that I needed to do this book in about 2006. It finally came out in 2009, 3 years. For a 150-page book, what happened? Well, I tell you, as I wrote about this, as I had started at that same time a convening of something called the American Indian and Alaska Native Climate Change Working Group out of my home institution, Haskell Indian Nations University. And so I was inviting Indigenous people from all over the contiguous 48 states and Alaska to come and meet with climate scientists. And I felt like what was missing at the time was there were all these climate scientists talking about climate change, and there seemed to be very little space for Indigenous people who have deep knowledges because of their relationship to place about what has happened over long periods of time. And it's experiential knowledge. It's knowledge they know. It's knowledge memorialized in song, in custom, in habit, in tradition, in language, in our prayers. And so, you know, I thought we've got to, Indigenous people need to have a seat at the table. So I started putting together NOAA scientists with NASA scientists, inviting people from EPA, and then inviting these incredible wisdom keepers I had met through the years. Being at Haskell Indian Nations University, which most of you know is the de facto sort of national or international tribal college in the United States, we serve every federally recognized tribe, rancheria, pueblo, Alaska Native village, so all contiguous 48 states in Alaska. Any given year, we will have over 100 nations, sovereign nations represented on our campus. So I had started these discussions and I knew there's such wisdom here. We've got to figure out a way to share this. So I thought about that book and I started sketching it out. And it was very difficult because as I started reading the science, I got depressed. I started looking at what the scientists were saying we were doing and what the elders were describing was happening in the Arctic Circle, in the Intermountain West, across the Great Plains, in the Great Lakes. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is going to happen to humankind, much of the life we share this planet with and this planet itself? And so I was struggling. And somewhere probably about a year into the project, I was just getting close to maybe saying, you know what, I can't write this because I don't think, I'm trying to figure out how I say something hopeful. And as usual, I did something that I had learned was a good way to solve problems. I reached out to some of those wise elders I had seen. I had talked to the legendary Billy Frank now, who has started his journey to the stars, the leader of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. I had talked to Albert Whitehat, traditional language teacher at Sinte Gleska University. You know, I just started reaching out to people. Dr. Henrietta Mann, a scholar in a Western sense, but also very deeply steeped in her Cheyenne traditions. And I can't actually remember who exactly said these words to me, but the cumulative kind of effect of what they all told me in one way or another was, you've got to quit looking to humans for the answers. We have many relatives on this planet: the plants, the animals, the relatives that reside in the land, on the land, in the water, the birds, the wind, the air. They're relatives in our traditions, and they are our teachers. And at that moment, I thought, gee, Dan, you've gotten so caught up in living in this room full of mirrors where everything we look at is what humans have created, what humans have built. Mirrors where everything we look at. And I talk about this a lot, in my own, in my earlier work, but I just got so wrapped up in reading the science and looking at things. I forgot for a minute that yes, there is wisdom and knowledge all around us. In fact, today, modern environmental science and ecology is basically built on that premise that you can't understand life in isolation of the environment, the ecosystem they are situated in. It's this complex web of life we are involved in. And when they reminded me of that, then all of a sudden, I thought, there's great reason to be hopeful. Because in spite of the destruction that humankind is now responsible for in this age of the Anthropocene, we have lost species, we have lost relatives on this planet. But it's amazing how many are still here, how many surround us. And about this time, I started thinking a lot about, teachings and wisdom. And I realized that one of the things that maybe we need to share with scientists, maybe part of this discussion that we need to have with some of the best and brightest scientists in the world, is that, for all of your technology, for all of your tools, and you can create good knowledge and things, but you've got to remember that we're not living in a world full of resources. And in many indigenous traditions, we acknowledge we live in a world full of relatives. That is our community, the largest life system community, that we're a part of on this planet. And I found tremendous hope in that, because I thought, here's something that we should start doing. We need to start really emphasizing that we're never going to save ourselves. What we have to do is listen, pay attention, and learn from the natural systems that are around us. Now, it turns out now, a lot of scientists in their own technical way are saying the exact same thing. But here may be something else to think about. In the approach I want to discuss today, I think the true value of it is it allows for a recognition of beauty in the world. In a world filled with so much ugliness, and I will have to say most of that ugliness is created by humankind, we're still surrounded by beauty.
So I imagine I'll actually see her, and then I'll get to
the beauty in the wind, the beauty in the sunsets and the sunrises. And I think that's valuable, so here I'll touch on the first point and that I'd like to make today. And that is, I think that for those people that get rightfully disturbed by what they see that much of our human kin are doing in the world, that's destructive, that's mean, that's painful. We have a whole bunch of relatives that we can look to and still see beauty. I don't call that romanticism, I call that indigenous realism. The communities that we are a part of are life communities, are ecological communities. And I think part of what we've got to do is we've got to situate our lives back in meaningful ways in those communities. So here's, where a lot of mental health counselors, people who do therapies and things, have already discovered, and many of you are probably already practicing some of these sort of methods, these ways of soothing your soul in a period of such incredible turmoil and chaos and crisis. And, that is by getting out of doors, by turning your phone off, by getting out from in front of your laptop and taking walks, breathing deeply of the air around us, and paying attention to the earth, the water, and all of this life around us. In a very profound sense, that constitutes the moral universe we live in is not purely an ethical, is not a anthropocentric universe. And in many indigenous traditions, I would say, a common feature is the way in which we acknowledge the life system of this planet. My friend Oscar Coagli liked to talk about the cosmos and the universe as a moral presence, as a spiritual presence in our lives. And I think that, at least for me, is one way of finding tremendous comfort when we seem to be surrounded by so much that's dysfunctional, that's full of crisis, full of anxiety, full of pain. So I would say, let's not only try to treat each other, our humankind, more respectfully, more responsibly, but let's think about our larger relationships to these communities that we are part of, these larger ecological, biological life system communities. And I think that's really, that should be probably, lesson number one. And you can do that real easy. Just get out of doors. We surround ourselves in a room full of mirrors almost every day. The landscapes we looked have been modified. We're in buildings, we're on highways and roads and streets and sidewalks and all of the things. And we forget that all of that is built on the earth. And if we can make those reconnections, and I think it's not hard, I think that will can be a source for great comfort. So when my elders told me, Dan, hey, you've got to look to our other relatives for hope, for wisdom, then for me, that was an epiphany that I cherish. And so I get great joy by walking my dog, every day. And I live in, right just west of downtown Lawrence in the neighborhood called Old West Lawrence. But it's amazing how if you pay attention, you can almost sense the way this land was before Lawrence was ever built. And that kind of knowledge is really important. In fact, we'd have a lot less flooding inside the city limits, I think, if the planners who laid out Lawrence would have been paying attention to the surface hydrology and where watersheds were within the city of Lawrence. And we probably wouldn't have built in some places where we built, where those of you who know Lawrence know we have areas where you don't want to be there when we have a heavy flood. Well, that's, again, not paying attention, okay? So let me start with that point and then move to another point that I think is really important for us to understand. And that is, first of all, I think as we try to reconstitute in whatever way we can, through our art, through our exercise, for our very breathing itself, those of you I know that do practices of Zen or other sort of Eastern forms of meditation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We are the air we breathe. Now, we've got to learn how to take a deep breath every once in a while and develop that mindfulness. That said, I want everyone to understand this. And I don't know what the term is. I'm sure Barbara can can maybe address this in the comments area or in our discussion later. And some of you probably know more about the psychological side of this, but I do know that, you know, one thing we need to be aware of, it's perfectly reasonable to feel worried about, to feel this kind of anxiousness about what we see happening on the planet today. I think for people who are sensitive and well connected in the way that I've discussed, you can't help but sense that. And the more deeply you sense that, the more painful it is. And again, I think the source of sort of addressing that is keeping in mind that while it's in some ways maybe normal, I get worried about the people, quite frankly, who don't see any problem right now and think everything's fine. And as soon as everyone gets the vaccine, it's back to normal. We can all get back to normal. And I'm going like, really? I don't see it that way, you know? And so I think it's very normal to react that way, to have those emotions, to have those feelings. But what I would suggest is, and I think that's what our group, you know, this community that we want to form around climate change awareness is about. We need to find those relatives, whether they be human kin, whether they be plants and animals, that can help us, that can support us. And I think there's if COVID has demonstrated to us anything, that what we really need, and that's why I'm so glad to be a part of this initiative, is we've got to do some serious community building now. We desperately need it. I think about our children now, and I think a lot about my granddaughter. And I think about what kind of world is my granddaughter going to have? You know, what are we doing? And so I think, you know, the good news is, as more people kind of recognize this, I think there is a movement for us to come together, for us to work together, for us to talk, for us to share, for us to help each other out, for us to be good relatives. I mean, and you know, here's so, you know, we got this larger community. It's natural. My second point is it's natural to feel the pain when we see that community facing such crises, often difficult circumstances, sometimes, you know, destruction and death. But I think, again, the same thing that makes us feel that way is the source for our solving that. We've got to really focus on coming together, supporting each other, building these communities, listening to each other, you know, loving each other. And I think that, you know, the third point, you know, that I'd like to kind of draw out here just for a second is that, you know, what COVID, I think, has presented to many of us is the fact that not only that we need community, and while I'm grateful we have this technology right now for us to do this kind of exchange, I have no illusions. This is a pale reflection of what we could be sensing and experiencing if we were all together right now. And I wish we were. And maybe someday here in the near future, we will have those gatherings and convenings. But I think in the meantime, what we've got to do is figure out how to be very, very intentional with our use of technology. Okay? I think probably many people on this were disturbed by what they saw on January 6th occur in the capital of the United States of America. And, you know, this technology had a lot to do with that. Everyone thinks technology is going to solve every problem. Well, not necessarily. I think we need to be very intentional in our use of technology now. And so when I was working with Vine Deloria Jr., my good friend and mentor, and kind of the dean of Indigenous Studies and American Indian Studies in the United States, and we wrote the book, Power and Place, Indian Education in America. One of the things I wrote about was technology in that book. And I said, you know, the problem with technology is we treat that, you know, as an independent variable, and we shouldn't. We shouldn't. You know, technology is a function of culture, community, and communication. And one of the things we should always ask ourselves is technology being used in a way to strengthen our sense of community. Now, again, I'm talking not just about human community, I'm talking about community to all the life on the planet, okay? And is it enhancing our expression of culture? Is it really making communication richer? Is it making communication, facilitating better communication? And I think right now, unfortunately, we'd have to say a lot of what goes on the internet isn't necessarily facilitating community. It isn't necessarily facilitating a sense of a rich culture. And as far as a communication device, unfortunately, it seems a lot of it is almost reduced down to you know, a sort of propaganda kind of instrument. So I think we've got to be really circumspect about what we do right now. We've got to live intentionally. We have to build community, inclusion of building community. We've got to make sure that we reframe community in the big picture of all of the life on this planet. As my Lakota friends say, they have a phrase, some of you've heard it if you've ever been around Lakota or Dakota or Nakota speakers, it goes something like this, Mitakuye Oyase. What does that mean? We are all related. And so when they say prayers, they will end with Mitakuye Oyase, or they'll say, for all of my relatives. And they mean everyone, all life. They pray for the planet. They pray for all people on the planet. And if you do that, if you kind of move from a resource-driven view of the earth to a relative view of the earth, then you can make another shift. So I'm going to wrap this up here in 3 minutes. This would be the, you know, kind of point 4. If you move from thinking about resources and reconstruct your worldview to think about a world full of relatives, then you can disabuse yourself of thinking the only political inheritance we should adopt of inalienable rights. Sure, there are such things, and they are important. I know of no people in the world that value those more than Indigenous peoples, but they also know that rights are hollow. They are without foundation if not complemented with inalienable responsibilities. Think about it. When we live among resources, all we do is fight about our rights over who's going to use what resource. When you live among relatives, you ask yourself, what is the responsibility I have to live well with the relative? I think we've got tremendous opportunities right now to start modeling in very small ways to community scale ways, ways in which we can embrace this move from a world full of resources to one where I acknowledge relatives to a world that's predominantly dominated by inalienable rights. I mean, think about this. We're living in a pandemic time when we have a large number of our population who won't wear a mask because it's a violation of their inalienable right. What happened to the inalienable responsibilities you have to your human kin? We've got to foster this sense that we have inalienable rights and we have also inalienable human responsibilities. If we do that, I kind of feel like, we can move past the discussion about sustainability. And what we should talk about is something I call resilience plus. That means we want to restore relationships. We want to enhance them. And we'd like to leave the life systems, our communities on this planet, better than the way they were when we came into this world. And I don't think that's a bad goal. I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it's hard work, and I think we can do it together. And so that's where I found hope. That was where my hope came from and gave me the energy to finish my book, Red Alert. Just happen to have a copy of it right here. And I'll be eternally grateful to those wisdom keepers who told me, Dan, don't forget those other than human relatives that can help you. I think we need them now more than ever, and they might teach us something about how to be better, more competent human beings. I think they can. I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to have a discussion, questions, whatever. So I'm going to stop right there. Sun Lai, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dan. This is Sammy Aaron. I have one question before we quit recording. One of the things in your book that just really struck at my heart was when you were talking about the spirituality of place and the deep spatial relationship that we have to the literal land that we're on, the place that we're at. And I know on our call, we have people, most people, yes, are in Kansas City or Lawrence area, but we have a number of people from around the country, a couple people registered from outside the US who may be listening later. Can you talk about that a little bit more? What's the difference in my connecting to the tall grass in the Flint Hills versus someone in Alaska, for example? How do we think about that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Sammy, because that's kind of the, my mentor's the one who sort of pulled out his basic principle, what he called Indigenous Metaphysics. He says it's really this: power plus place equals personality. And his notion was that no matter where you are on the planet, people like yourself who have a deep, let's say Sammy has a profound relationship and a sense of wellness, a spiritual connection with the tall grass prairie. That's going to be unique to that place. But analogously, people who live in the Great Lakes, those forests on the lakes, those lake waters, they have a deep sense of connectedness, those indigenous peoples, to those places. And so what is really shared in the abstract, Deloria thought, was this notion that, our spirituality and our personalities are shaped. Each one of us is unique. Each one of us is built in this complex web of relationships. Deloria just happened to highlight for indigenous peoples, it turns out most respect the land as that most fundamental first relationship, that place. Or as my Hawaiian friends, my Samoan friends now tell me, well, you've got to include, not just landscapes, but seascapes also. That sense of identity, that connection, that profound reverence for that relationship. So I would say it's very similar, Sammy, that people like someone in New York State as opposed to someone in the Everglades or Florida, or some of my students down there on Second Mesa in Arizona, that it's quite possible that we know Indigenous people have over hundreds and thousands of years built this deep sense of identity and connectedness. I think that the point to it is, from a practical standpoint, that relationship for the Seminoles in Florida and how they understand that, and then what that means in terms of their responsibilities, by its very nature, the very nature of that environment will be different than what you would be led to think of as responsible behavior in the Flint Hills. So I think that the key to the way, I have matured to think about our so-called, quote, religious traditions, which I don't think that's really an appropriate way to describe it, but these ancient ways of life that honor the earth, that honor the water, that honor the wind, these spiritual traditions, if you will, is that they are unique. They are going to be unique in their expression given where those people are. And yet, when we all come together, we all sort of recognize, oh, we all have that same profound connectedness to that special part of the earth we feel related to. Yeah. And so I think it's very much an experiential phenomenon. I think that's why in Native traditions, you won't find many theologists, because you don't have to write down your theology if you live it, if it's experienced. I can't teach you to feel, but you can feel, and you'll find, and I know that's what a lot of people are struggling with today. But that's just kind of a short answer to your question. So I think the point is, what's different? The phenomena is essentially the same, but the unique expression of that power and what you feel will be unique to that place. And I think that's fine. That's part of the beauty of this world, is it's not all the same. It's full of incredible diversity.
Great. So I'm going to move on to my question, which you talked about inalienable responsibilities. And I was raised Catholic and haven't shaken all of the guilt induction that went with that. So I know for me and for lots of people I work with, knowing or feeling that sense of responsibility is part of the deep anxiety. And, people struggle with, what's my place? What's my role? I can't possibly do everything.
That's correct.
And so do you have some guidance for people about how to think about themselves in that process, that it isn't theirs to do everything, but how should we figure that out? Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good question. I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer. And I think for everyone, once you're mindful of that and you're thinking of that, that's the first step, right? You're already thinking about that. And I don't think you don't want this to be something that produces anxiety or anxiousness about this. I think, it can be in the most simple expressions of kindness. I got to be honest with you, this last year has been the most disturbing thing that I have sensed on this planet, is a sort of mean-spiritedness sometimes that I find hard to reckon with. And what it's led to think is that tells each of us who see this and who feel this who experience this, that I think it's more important now that we show, even in the most simple things we do, kindness, okay? It's about, you know, how we live. And so my dad always used to say, you know, to me, remember, you know, it's not just what you do, Dan, that's important, but it's how you do it. And I've really been thinking about that a lot lately. It's how we do things, how we show respect in our interaction, how we try to be responsible, how we live our lives that can be the most important, I think, area where we situate how we're going to honor and enact the responsibilities that we accept. The simplest version thing I always tell my students, and I think, you know, Barbara could talk probably a lot about this, but, you know, think about the gift of having kind, loving parents. I tell my students, if you want to be a hero, be a good parent. Be a good parent, because you know what? All of us see what happens to children who don't have loving parents, who don't have kind parents, and what the cost we pay for that is, how it affects everyone. And so I think, you know, it's in the littlest things we do, showing kindness, expressing kindness, thankfulness, and those are things that generate, as my students would say, you know, what goes around comes around. It seems like if you can put more of that into the world, then you're likely to really receive some of that back. And it's not a transactional thing. It's not like, oh, this is why we're doing it. Not at all. It just seems the right thing to do, and this kind of good stuff comes back to you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you get to that, because I think that that is one of the guiding principles I would want people to take on, is that if, you know, you won't get burnt out if you're doing the things that are yours to do, because they will give you plenty back.
And that's so right. I mean, that's I like that, because, you know, that's Vine always used to say the reason he liked this power plus place equals personality. Place is that acknowledgement of all of these situational, right? None of us are in the same place right now. Each of us has unique experiences. And, you know, what I keep thinking of, I want to be in a learning environment someday, and I think we can do this. Someone's going to ask about education, I know. I think one of the things we need to do is where we start thinking about an education system where we honor our students' knowledge as unique human beings before we ever start trying to teach them something. They all know something. And, you know, I long for a time when, you know, we can be in spaces where we can share. Everyone on this Zoom meeting knows something that if we could sit, you know, long enough and visit, you would share something with me that I don't know, because I'm not you, that would make me a better human being.
Thank you, Dan. So let's see, we've got a few comments and a question. I'm not sure where. Sammy, there were some questions from people who signed up. Do we also have those?
Yeah, I have one that I can ask. Barbara, do you at this point want me to stop recording and shift it out of spotlighting Dan, or should we leave it the way it is now?
Let's leave it if you're going to ask questions that came in the registrations, unless people want to identify with that being their question. And then I guess when we get to an open discussion, we didn't want to record all of you. So yeah, trying to sort that out. But yeah, go ahead, Sammy, ask that.
Okay, this is someone who's not on the call today. How would you advise the school of the future to prepare children and families for our changing world?
Well, I think we've got to rebuild that connection to our larger families, our ecological families in the world. I don't know why we can't get children out of doors more regularly in their formal education. Children have a difficulty sitting still in a classroom all day. I don't think it's a particularly good method, a good way to treat them. I think children like to garden. They like to get their hands dirty. They like to explore things. And I think that, you know, what we should do is really think about a whole curriculum where we had students out of doors in a community learning things rather than in front of a screen like we are now or holding a book in a classroom. And I think that would really help us. I think the one thing that I think is a challenge is we get so enamored, see, with this technology and everything around us, is that we become inattentive to the earth, to the plants, to the animals, and all of that. And that's the problem. That's the age of the Anthropocene. We've done a lot of things to make humans more comfortable, make life more convenient, and in the process, we've destroyed a lot of life on this planet in doing so. And so I think my rule of thumb right now is figure out ways to teach biology, to teach science, to teach math, to teach art, to teach creative writing and things out of doors. And I think people won't take that beauty that surrounds them for granted anymore.